Hello and welcome to Conversations in Close Protection with your hosts Chuck Randall and Chris Story. Our goal is to engage the greater protection community, inspire innovative thought, and as always, continue the conversation around all things close protection.
This is Conversations in Close Protection, August Shoptalk. I'm Chuck Randolph, and across the digital divide, the Schadenfreude of security, Mr. Chris Story. That kind of suits you, honestly.
Yeah,
with your dry wit, I think it does.
I mean, doesn't everything?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm fresh with my ATAP mug.
Shop talk. Nice. Yeah, ATAP. How was that?
Very good. ATAP is a conference that I love to attend. I never put in to speak. I rarely put on to be in a panel or anything else. It's a place that I love to go and just listen and learn. They've got so many tracks. It's really well done and continues to be. And many of those folks at ATAP, of course, a lot of show listeners there. I got stopped 2 or 3 times by people saying thanks for everything you guys do. And of course, there's always the gathering of EP and close protection practitioners, like the unofficial event. And I know it's great. I saw, Tobin, Flannery, where were you? You were on the road. I mean, it was great. I wasn't there the full time because, as you know, Chris, I covered down, spoke at Phelim's conference, the Convergence conference in Phoenix. And then because of your travel, I covered down for you as well.
Thank you.
So I was doing double duty that week, man.
Yeah, you got a lot going on.
Well, I'm sure you weren't goofing off, or no, I'm going to just guess you probably weren't goofing off. So
probably, but whatever.
No, I mean, it's crazy that actual week too. My wife is in the industry as well, and for that whole week, probably for the first time ever, our schedules synced up perfectly.
Oh, really?
We both
were
at
ATAP doing two ships passing in the night.
Usually, well, it was nice because she had to head out for some advanced work in the greater Phoenix area, and I had to be there for Phelim's thing, and then we were able to kind of hang for a day and go spend it with a really good friend of ours that works at Boeing. It was his birthday.
Nice.
So it was nice. But then, since then I've been to 2 other cities. So I think you were on the infamous, hey, it's a 4-day tour, and 2 weeks later,
yeah,
I'm home.
That's it. 4
It's
days,
a 3-hour tour. Come on, it'll be nice.
Yeah, it'll be fine. You don't need your nods or your freaking back plates, bro. You'll be fine.
You'll be fine, man. Just one MRE, you'll be good, bro.
Yeah.
It's the sirloin burger too.
Yeah, you're stoked. Now you have to make it last for a week and a half.
Yeah. So I listened in my travels, Chris, to this. I can't remember the guy's name, but he's an ultra marathoner. And let me see if I can pull it up while we're chatting here. And
that in itself is freaking.
Well,
not awesome.
That itself, you're like, what the heck? And his he's an old school ultra marathoner. I can't remember his name, but he's been around a while. And it's like a health and fitness podcast, and they're asking like, well, what are you doing next? He's got a book coming out, of course. And he's like, he and a friend are wanting to do, I think this is interesting. They're wanting to do a marathon that starts at the lowest, or a run that starts at the lowest part of the earth, which I believe is not the Mojave, but the Dead Sea, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the way up to the highest point, Everest. And they were trying to figure out, how can we do that? It's going to take several months. And they were like, well, one of the routes would take us through Iran and Iraq, and clearly the U.S. government is against that. Although when they talk about it on social media, all the runners in those countries, of course, are like, we'll we'll band together and protect you and all that. And he's like, or, and I did laugh out loud, listen to this. He's like, or my partner thinks that we could paddle across the Indian Ocean. I'm like, never to be seen again. Little Johnny and Jake took off in their ultra light paddleboard.
Right.
Across all
like choices, right? Like, well, let's do this, or let's hit ourselves in the face with a hammer, or
I have a crescent wrench.
Yeah, exactly.
All I could think about what he's talking about, that of course Iraq and in Iran, I get that, but then I was thinking about those videos you see that are taken off the front of ships or vessels, and you see those waves in the Indian Ocean. And I'm just like, you and me on a little paddleboard, like, here we go, guys. Keep
we got
paddling.
it. We're doing it, boys. We're doing it. This seems
But
like a great idea. And then,
also interesting.
And then you drop the compass, and you're like, you just keep paddling. Like, I'm not going to say anything because
Chris, I'm almost out of my sirloin burger. You're going to die.
Exactly.
But I'm also thinking, like, I did not get the impression that they're like, of course, I didn't get the impression they were completely willy-nilly. They're just talking about what would the options be, and they're going to figure something out. But I mean, that would be a cool thing, you know. And every once in a while, as a security practitioner, you get those things thrown on you, like, hey, how do you go about doing this? And it's not like you can say, hey, okay, we need, you know, $75,000 because we're going to hire, you know, 5 people and 2 cars and whatever. I mean, you know, it's not like they have a ton of money to do this. I was thinking about our buddy who protected the Royals and did the bike ride. Dean and both his wife. I mean, she organized all the logistics and he did the work. I mean, interesting. I mean, it just goes to show, like, anything you're doing has a component of risk, therefore has the ability to put a blanket to solve for risk. So,
well, and again, the blanket of solve for risk, like we talked about like hammer or crescent wrench, but at the end of the day, it's to solve for risk at the acceptable level, right? So, I mean, you know, while we're using tool analogy, it might be like, okay, great, but we're going to use a mallet because of these things, and it moves us into the acceptable risk category, right? But
the mallet floats.
There you go, right? And then of course, you know, we'll have a medic on standby, and we'll have lots of bandits and a tourniquet, and a psychologist, and all of these things, and then you know, your overall risk is reduced. So,
well, he also,
I see what you did there. That was well played, sir.
Yeah,
well played.
That was like one cup of coffee in. He also it was interesting. He did a run in the South Pole, and it was like one of the first ever. And I didn't go. I haven't gone and fact checked this or anything, but it might be the only time he attempted it. They did this big push. I think only a very limited number of people showed up, and of that, only very number of limited people ran it. And he was like, I was afraid to stop running because I thought like my lungs would freeze up or something. So I mean, I listen to these, and I also think like, wow, okay, did we think this through?
Right.
Or maybe it would be good to have a security practitioner or a risk practitioner on that to consider, like, okay, what are the realities of doing this and what do we need to do? So I don't know. Interesting. That's where my brain always goes, like, what's the risk plan around this? I'm sure other people are like, can't you just enjoy the podcast?
Hey, that's what you're here for.
Yeah, that was enjoyable for me, man.
Yeah, this is what we do. Come on, man.
Oh, man. What have you been up to?
Well, I have risk on the brain now, and I was just trying to figure out like how do I approach risk in my daily life, right? Like when I go for a sporty motorcycle ride, like what when
you paddle across the Indian Ocean?
Yeah, that's a no for me. I have too much stuff going on. I enjoy my free time, the limited free time I have too much.
Free time? You don't have free. You've not been issued free time.
No, but I think that's an interesting question where you, like, how much do you apply the risk equations to your life, right? And a lot of times, like one of the things you talk about always is like protectors are really good at doing it in the moment, not so good at planning for it, right? Because I'm here for tactical, bro. I can make these decisions in the moment, But as you look at it, like you really have to peel it back and go, okay, what route am I taking? And most of it's for logistics, not necessarily security.
Yeah.
Unless you've ingrained it in your operational, in your daily operations, that you're just gonna, you like to take different routes for whatever reason, not necessarily for logistics purposes. So
No, and I think at some level, I mean, look, you and I,
interesting capture.
yeah, I mean, I've been in this doing it 30 years, and I think I was probably far more like, I'll say overtly, but like doing it when I first started as of now. I mean, some of it's ingrained, like, okay, what are we doing? How are we doing? This kind of looks weird. Okay, let's do this. Let's flip on ways and just take a random route because A, it might be a better route. B, it's going to take me away from what seems to be, backing traffic. Hey, people are gathering. There's a crowd gathering there. Let's walk over here. Just little things
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
By the way, that podcast is American Glutton with Ethan Suplee. Highly recommend it. And the guy's name was Dean Karnazes. And yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those random pods that I listen to when I'm at the gym or walking, or because not everything is going to be close protection or geopolitics, but it still enters my mind even when I'm doing it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good.
Well,
And I think that makes me wonder if you like, because we're so focused on the work process, right? And you drop it down pretty quickly for your daily operations, right? I mean, again, it's just ingrained, so you probably don't peel it back as much, But from a security perspective, but I do, right? I mean, I know I do.
You come to Austin a lot. Austin's a great place. Like any major metropolitan city, there are some sketchy ass places.
Right.
There's been a couple times I've, got to a place super early, didn't like what I saw outside, circled a couple times to see. A couple other times I'll just park over here and observe for a minute. And I didn't do like, I'm going to park over here and observe, brother. You just kind of do it, It's like,
Right.
Oh, okay. Whatever that is, it's, somebody letting their dog out or doing something or, like just little things, like, oh, most of the cars are backed in, I'll back in. Most of the cars are front in, I'll go ahead and front in,
Yeah.
But I think I mean, gosh, what was it? Several years ago, you were on a couple podcasts, talking about the difference between prepping and being a prepper. And I think this is kind of along those lines too. Like, where's your mindset at, situational awareness for the job, situational awareness, ingrained in you.
Right.
One's a way of life and the other maybe is a mission. I'm not quite sure.
Well, I think that when you talked about it, like I said, hey, I'm going to go for a ride this afternoon, right? And I started to peel back, like, what do I look at, right? And obviously I wear safety gear and all this stuff, and then I make sure I have a cell phone, and that I can reach the cell phone, and then I've got my my identification, and usually somebody knows the routes I take, and so all that kind of layered approach that we just do all the time, not as like, hey, I'm a big safety nerd or whatever, but you kind of like, the old Gatwa, right? Like, here's where I'm going, here's what I'm going to do, here's what's going to happen if I don't come back, blah, blah, blah. And you kind of have that understanding, so that you've got that, always got that safety.
It's true. Even now when I travel, if I'm not traveling for something operational, I still send out the wheels up, wheels down text to someone in the family. I mean, and I'm, there's when you're doing it, wheels up this time, checkpoint this, whatever. And sometimes, I still do it now where I'm like, wheels up. Unfortunately, my daughter has suffered for that many years where she's like, okay, Dad, I got it. Thank you. But at least, someone's like, okay, something goes down, which seems crazy in today's information, world, that you wouldn't know right away if there was a problem.
Right. But really, like what's the probability that, there's a plane crash, and B, it's yours, right? That somebody's going to go, oh, okay. Like, you hear about it. Well, if you're flying to LA and the plane crashes in LA, that might pique your interest a little bit more.
Yep.
But again, and then of course, like, what exactly are they going to do? But
yeah. Oh, and who else is pretty good at situational awareness and every day is our number one fan. She's told me several times where she's like pulled up to work, something going down. She parks, not where, she parks in places she knows that, like, hey, this is going to be a place that's, eyes on, or there's a camera or something. And, I asked her once, like, what's the bug out plan? She's like, side door here, back door there.
Nice.
If something goes down in the store, I'm just walking out one of the side doors and that's it. I'm going to, walk across the street to the gas station or walk around to my car and just leave. I'm like, you go, girl.
Yeah, I think that's the, when you talk about like the red pill, blue pill, or the matrix or whatever, right? Like a simple exercise like you talk about is just pulling up somewhere, really anywhere, and then just sitting there for an hour and just watching, right? Because you have a ripple effect on your environment when you show up. So that vehicle, whatever you're in, changes your environment. But then as the environment starts to get comfortable with that, it's just like hunting. As the environment starts to get comfortable with your presence, it goes back to normal, and then your ability to see not what is just presented to you, but what is actually happening around you it's pretty startling, because it makes you realize, like, as people go day to day through life, like how are you not seeing this, right? And once you're able to see it, it's hard to unsee. You're like, okay, you start watching all of these moving parts, you're like, oh, okay, that guy's looking at this, and this guy's looking at that, and this lady's not paying attention to anything. And, you can really see all the craziness that's happening around you. And it's a really good exercise just to understand that what's presented is not necessarily what's actually happening.
Yeah. I remember as a young infantry officer, you go to the schoolhouse and you're taught, hey, we're going to start a patrol. You get like 50, 60 meters in, everybody stop, face out, take your cover off, and just listen.
Right.
And I think there's a lot I think you can learn from just an infantry patrol that you can use in protection in everyday life. But the same, like, you go to a hotel, like, let's get after it and do this and make a big splash. Let's go to our room, drop our bag, come down the back stairs if you're not 85 stories up, sit in the corner with a cup of coffee and just watch who's coming in and out. You don't need to go and ask and this because I told this at school, and just relax for a minute.
Yeah.
And then you can do that. But I think your metaphor analogy is a good one. Like, you drop into the pool and there's a ripple. If you just wait for a minute, that ripple will settle down and you can far more easily interact in that environment. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Write that down, kids.
No, and well, look, here's the deal. We're both consultants. This shit is free, and it's a success factor that you would pay for
free?
in class. Anyways.
Hey, speaking of that, we got some news, and since you brought up it's free, let's talk Venmo for a minute.
Okay.
Dude, see what I did there?
You're really good with the segues.
Home
Segues
run.
And dad jokes.
I'm pulling back on the dad jokes, although
Thank God.
although I got some doozies, man. I've heard from some people. Can't wait to lay them on my kids so they can just look at me like, what are you thinking about? So I saw something in the New York Times a few weeks ago, and the title of the article was, "This is a reminder that you're probably oversharing on Venmo." Venmo is the mobile app. It allows you and me to send money back and forth. The default setting, most may know this, if not, especially if you have kids or you're dealing with principals or something, the default setting is public, which means people can see what you're doing, when you're doing, the time it was, as well as if you put it in there, a brief description. May not seem like a big deal, but if you think over time and you want to consider a pattern of life, I know Chris is going to order Chick-fil-A every Wednesday at 5 with a little smiley face because someone's coming over, or, he keeps sending money to Chuck. Who is that guy? All those things.
So, it's funny you mentioned this because even though, as I look over the last week, even though I don't look or don't share, hey, here's where I'm going, here's what I'm doing, here's all the things, right? The digital footprint, and if you overlay that with other people, what does that look like, right? So like when you talk about that pattern of life, when my pattern of life from Venmo is laid out, right? I get to know who the network is, what I'm sending it for, how often, and what I'm doing, right? So I think mine, it says lawn care, freaking training, consulting, whatever, right? And then it tells you the time. I think it also, like housekeeping or whatever, right? But then if you were to overlay that and like LinkedIn or something that gave your location or check-ins or Facebook, right? Suddenly you start to get this total picture of, Chris Story, who he is, what he's doing, etc. And then you go from there. And that becomes a very, very, not scary. I think it's just
No, it
shocking
is.
to go like,
And
look, here's what's known about you just by you using digital tools.
when people are doing it. You're school trained, MI. We've had multiple people on the show. I think about Lauren and others who like, hey, look, I was trained by the DIA, the CIA, whoever to do targeting. We're not, all countries do it. When they leave, what do? They could do it for themselves. They could do it as a stalker. They could do it, just to target for insider risk. I mean, it happens. Speaking of situational awareness. So I think you're right. And it gets especially spooky, Chris. You're right. When you say, let's take this, let's go over here to LinkedIn. We got some Facebook posts. I can look at TikTok,
Instagram.
And if you've got those all wide open, well, God help you. But even if you don't have them all wide open, somebody that has the mindset to do that what is that, F3EA or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they can start doing that, saying, fine, fix, and, okay, here we go. Now I'm getting a picture about Chris. And then I can look at Chris's personal supply chain, if you will, and say like, oh, who's this guy, Chuck? That cuts his grass. Let's go talk to him.
Right.
Or who's this dog walker? Okay, we'll give them, $10,000 to let us in the house.
Right.
Right.
And I think all of those things kind of align to that big picture. And I think the scary part is that once you did all of those overlays, how accurate that it would be from a pattern of life perspective, right? So,
yeah,
like you're a little bit more secure, but your banking transactions, right? Like somebody does a skim reader. You happen to use a skim reader, at any place where you go, and they're able to capture your banking information. And then suddenly now you can go, okay, great. Here's pattern of life where we use your main either ATM, debit card, credit card. I know exactly where you are, real time. I know what you purchased, and I know what's happening, right? So I can follow you from, there's a gap in 8 hours, and then you freaking do another one, and you're getting gas or a rental car or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And it will give you a very, very clear picture of what exactly your operational activities are.
Yeah, and I would say, like, look, it's pretty easy to go in and default it to private. You can do it. You can also hide your contacts. Kids, read. I do like the fact that when you're on Apple now, if you have an Apple phone, you can see like what information they're tracking, what they're not. I mean, many of it, if my kids come to me and say, hey, can we get this app? I'll look at it. It's an automatic no-go if it's grabbing your contacts.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think something else I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially with, look, we as protectors, if you're still in that world, it's like cyber doesn't matter to me, brother. I don't do this, sister. I don't, you're probably not listening to this podcast, honestly. You're somewhere else. And God bless you and good luck with your career, because it's here and it's now, and it's something we have to be knowledgeable and understand. And I think, just like a compliance, hey, I need to go qualify with my weapon, or I need to go get my annual CPR cert or BLS certification. I need to make sure that the vehicles are on their routine cycle. We need to start adding in our digital information or our personal operational security tune up as well. Let's go check out all the apps, make sure that they're where they need to go. Have we done this? Because I think there's maybe a silent assumption that it's all fine. And Chris, if they really want me, they're going to get me anyway, right?
Right. So, but at the end of the day, you want to make it harder, right? I mean, at the end, I mean that's the whole idea behind a security alarm or signs or all the things, is that make it so it's like, this isn't worth it, or at least they have to freaking struggle at every given moment, and then every time they got to struggle is an opportunity for you to catch them in that struggle,
and also make them go somewhere else.
Well, yeah,
one of the tenets of protection, especially in the private world, is like, look, I just don't make it your problem, make it somebody else's. And there's plenty of examples where criminals or bad actors have said, hey, we can't get into here. We're just going to go down the street.
Yeah.
I know that sounds terrible. And I'm
No,
not
it's
saying
not.
you don't talk to the people down the street, but at the end of the day, you know, you have a principle to maintain. You have a retainer that you're responsible for.
Yeah, but here's the deal: is that we open this discussion with risk assessment.
Exactly.
Right? So the criminal makes the risk assessment that it's just the risk isn't worth the reward, or it's too difficult. So let's shift our target to this other thing that's not difficult. I mean, everybody does risk assessment, you know, one way or another.
Exactly.
You know?
And while we're on that subject, here's another tangential article to that. That was in Science and Tech News about, you know, Chinese actors using LinkedIn to target British officials. I mean, I don't think most people listening to this are like, I'm not surprised by that. I'm not surprised that a state actor or a non-state actor would use something like LinkedIn to target. We've just been talking about it, but they found that there was targeting of about, you know, thousands of British officials to try to mine secrets. You know, they used alias to try to bribe the officials to pass sensitive information. MI5 had warned researchers and UK research sectors about it. I mean, China's very good about saying, here's our 5-year plan, by the way. They'll tell you what they're going to go look at. If you're in the corporate side especially, you should go review the 5-year plans, you know, overlay it with your 10K and say, does anything in these sectors affect us? If so, who might be in our supply chain that we want to talk to about this? It's just a great reminder of, don't automatically click everyone that wants to be your friend on LinkedIn. 6,000 likes or 6,000 follows means nothing nowadays unless you're in an influence, unless you're trying to be an influencer, and that's a whole different thing. That's not protection, that's being an influencer.
Right.
And I,
and that's
you know,
subjective, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, there's a lot of implications to this, not just to government officials, but to private individuals, to those people that we're getting paid to protect, or organizations that we're, again, getting paid to do a risk assessment on.
Or just even some rando in your office that's like, oh,
yeah,
you know, he's hot or whatever the case is. Let me go connect with him on LinkedIn. The funny thing is that LinkedIn, while you know, there's two sides to every tool, right?
Yep.
And the you know, again, barrier to entry with this tool is you're like, well, I'll pay, you know, $70 a month, and that way, you know, it'll keep me more secure, as if $70 a month is a big lift for someone who's going to target you. You know, the next piece is it completely lays out all of the connections that you might have, second and third level. So if I go, look, I want to target Chuck, but I don't want to just walk up to him and go, hey, Chuck, I'm targeting you. I want to freaking have Chuck introduce me to somebody. I can go to LinkedIn, look at his connections, and look who he talks to, look who he interacts with, and look who he's aligned with, and look who's similar to Chuck, and I can ingrain myself with that person. They could do an introduction, because usually that one degree of separation indicates some level of trust, you know. And
yeah, and I
just
think
makes it so easy to lay it all out, you know.
Well, that's a good gong to ring that says, hey, don't rely just on the fact that an organization says, here's our policy to protect you. That's good. That's like going to the grocery store. I think about our Spencer Corson, our old buddy, and the safety trap. Look at these cameras. They're going to protect me if something happens. They're there, but they're not likely there to protect you individually. So don't rely. Don't rely. And if you're in a program or you're an individual in protection or security, don't rely on that either. Verify and then trust, and then verify again over and over and over. I also think about this, Chris, in the particular space, you know, especially spaces that you work in and I've worked in before, where you have, you have centers of gravity to sectors. And in those, you have people that are around those centers of gravity. And again, if Chris is the guy that's writing the code for the next bubblegum AI machine, and I don't need to go after Chris, I'll just go after little Johnny, because I see he interacts with little Johnny on Venmo. They're buddies on LinkedIn, and little Johnny is a car salesman, and I'll just go to him and buy a car and have a conversation. And get to know Chris. And you know, and people are very good at it. We could say, oh, I could spot those a mile away. Maybe. Depends on the level of the threat actor, right?
Yeah, fairly well. Yeah, again, are they low level? Are they high level? Are they experienced? Or is it the new kid who just came out of, threat actor school 101 and is like, uh, I need
I got
you to
kicked out of
connect.
the farm. I got
I need
kicked
you
out
to
of the
connect me
farm, and
with
now
Chris.
I'm gonna go after it.
Exactly. So, anyways, it just gets complicated, right? And I think it can get complicated,
Yeah.
but it is so simple. I mean, and I think it's as we
Is
talk
it
about this, it's a great
complicated or
exercise.
complex?
You're right. It is complex. It can get complex,
Yeah.
but it starts off being very simple. And I think a great exercise would be for you to go through, and you can't really grade your own homework, but you go, hey, bro, do me a favor. Look at these three things. Here's what I've got significant presence, and I'm going to give you a screenshot these other things that are open. What picture does that look like to tell you about me? Or here, give it to your girlfriend who doesn't know me very well and ask her to do it, because that's
Yeah.
going to give you a factual overview of what happens.
What's the hubris effect of doing that? I mean, is it a big leap of personal hubris to say, "Hey, Chris, I need you to check me"?
I don't think there is at all. I think it shows the lack thereof, right?
Yeah.
It's saying like, hey, dude, I want to make sure that I'm secure, and
Yep.
that I'm only sharing what I want to share. And here's my goal and objective with having an Instagram page, a Facebook page, and a
Am I
LinkedIn
meeting
and an
those
open LinkedIn.
objectives?
Am I meeting those
Well,
objectives? Right?
you know what? As we said in a interview a couple weeks ago, I mean, if you want to be professional, act professional. And maybe if
Right.
that's your goal, it's like, am I seen as a professional here?
Right.
Yes. Can you identify any gaps? Yes. Getting to the point to where you open that up, to yourself and all that, especially as a business person, I think is an important juncture in anyone's career, whether you're in security or not, is to be open to that critical feedback.
Right.
And then take action. Because feedback, it's an apple or whatever. You can grab it and consume parts of it that you want, throw the rest away. But that's a good idea. I like that. Like, let's go look at these three areas. Here's what I'm trying to emote, if you will. Am I doing this? And also, it's not like red team me and tell me everything you can find about me. And I see those folks on, LinkedIn or on the grams, and I think there's something to that as well. But I think as an individual practitioner, that what you're saying there has merit.
Well, I think the other thing is too is that when we talk specifically about active shooter, because that seems to be, an emotional topic, is that one of the things we always say is that there's always leakage, there's always something, right? And sometimes people go, well, that's too hard to see, but you have to be looking for it, right? That person has to rise to a threat which would make you go, let me look to see what they're leaking, at least at this moment in time, right? So as we pull that back to ourselves, sometimes we might slip, or on Veterans Day, or on freaking name whatever day, or somebody passes or whatever, and you go, hey, there's nothing about this on anywhere, but when Tom and I used to work together at the Ranger Regiment, blah blah blah, right? And you're like, well, wait a minute, there's no mention of that, of being in any of this at any time.
Mm-hmm.
That's leakage that says, hey, oh, this person has a skill set that I wasn't aware of.
Mm-hmm.
That may include some other things, and I need to go back and look through all of my information on this person to go, how does that increase or decrease their capability, skill sets, or profile, right?
Yeah.
Like from a targeting perspective or from a threat perspective on my end. Are they more dangerous or less dangerous? Like, and what are they hiding and why, right? And I think as we look at all of that and we use this simple approach to securing ourselves as we use that with threats, it's freaking, threat assessment, threat management 101.
Yeah, and if you have a small program or you don't have a lot of money to go hire a professional to do that kind of stuff on a principal or something, you can do that yourself too at some level, knowing, hey, look, if you run into something that's much deeper, like now you have cause to say, hey, look, I need to go ask for some resources to get someone with a deeper knowledge base to dig into this and help.
Right. And that's what the tools really provide you, is that you're able to get it pretty quickly, or at least set it so that it's feeding you information on what's happening. So you have to always look for it. Most of the stuff you can find on Google. It's just tedious and takes
Well, it's
time.
time consuming too. I mean, I think I think about where I work now and a lot of the platform users, it's, they're a 1 or 2 person show. So the ability, like you say, to have that like a behind the scenes action that's constantly looking and feeding is important because, not many people are fortunate enough to be on a team that has 25 people and 5 of them are dedicated to protective intel, 2 are dedicated to advanced work, and then you got another 5 dedicated to, covert protection. A lot of times it's 1 or 2 people, maybe a couple contractors on and off, and here we go, figure it out. Next, figure it out. Next, figure it out.
Right.
So I just saw another one, where election season is here. What was it? 2 weeks ago, by the time this airs, the Republicans have their first debate.
Yeah.
But now, election season just doesn't mean the top dog race. It trickles down all the way to local elections, and we are ones on this show that have often talked about, hey, look, local politicians don't always have the protectors, don't always have the resources that state or federal folks would. I saw something in the Idaho press where a man, Kevin Patrick Smith, was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison because he wanted to kill, in this case, it was a U.S. Senator, John Tester, but he had, he was calling the office and threatening to rip the guy's head off and other profanity-laced threats. The FBI had contacted him and told him, hey, cease and desist. He kept doing it. And as a result, he's now getting 3 squares for 2.5 meals. Begins, I think, by the time this airs, he'll begin his time in prison tomorrow. Again, it's, this is something where you have the Bureau, you have a senator. Now what happens as you walk up and down that chain? What's happening? I think, what was it, 2 years ago, where during COVID, we were talking about the PTA official that was getting death threats. This is going to continue to grow, and as we get towards the nexus, if you will, or the crest of election season, I predict it's just going to get worse.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, it's a free for all. Matter of fact, I think there's I actually had it up. There's a report here. Let's see. It talks about elected officials getting worse, right? Or threats against threats to public officials. They're taking up a disturbing trend that researchers are charting over a 10-year examination of federally investigated threats. So obviously, as an associated metric, right? If federal investigated threats are being, and an investigate is different than a threat on a federal official, right? Does it meet the threshold for a federal offense? So if federal officials are doing that at all levels, then clearly the volume of threats against officials amongst the scale are increasing as well. So, and we talked about that phenomenon where people felt, where you've got the filter of your cell phone or your email or whatever, you just clack off and do whatever you want and say whatever you want, and there's going to be no repercussion, which I think is a interesting societal view, but we won't get into that. It's going to get sporty, and it's going to get sportier, right? I mean, look at the dumpster fire of 2020.
Oh yeah. Are you talking about the National Counterterrorism Innovation Technology Education Center report?
Yes, sir.
In conjunction with the University of, okay, that's what I thought.
Yes.
Which,
indeed,
by the way, shout out to the University of Nebraska. They seem to have their foot in the threat assessment and tangentially in the protector community to help kind of figure some of this stuff out and look at some of these stats and numbers with more of an academic rigor, which I feel is very important, more important than kind of the casual observation. But it is, it is not going away. It's going to continue, as you say, to get sporty. We have the United States in particular. I know we have more than just the U.S. that listens in, but the United States in particular is kind of based on the foundation of the ability to have political discourse without violence. For some odd reason, ever since COVID, the barrier or the neutral zone between violence and discourse seems to be getting smaller and smaller. And I think we're going to continue to see threats against elected officials continue to rise. And the thing about that report, Chris, I don't know if, and we will link to it. I'll go look it up. But there was something in that report about they are taking, I think it's a 10-year, it's a 5 or 10-year study, and they're taking the numbers of threats that are reported. That's just what's reported. I was thinking when I looked at it, like how many of these local politicians or local judges or local mayors or whatever in a small town aren't reporting it at all.
Exactly.
And at what point does public official stop? The
Right.
PTA leader?
Yeah.
I would argue that public official.
Yeah, I mean, and at the end of the day, like if you don't know where to put it, or you don't know what to do, or you're just like, don't worry about it. I mean, because we deal with these threats all the time. You know, again, like you said, the difference between reported and unreported is likely extremely significant. You know.
Well, and I believe that, like, look, in any risk, there's also opportunity. The opportunity here is to get involved locally and say, hey, look, you know, I'm here. I'm happy to help or to do some threat management, threat assessment. Get involved in your ATAP community as well. Reach out to others. Start a coffee group in your community to start talking about threat assessment. Start talking about the public officials. You never know when someone might say, hey, Chris, I need some help with this. Can you do it? It might yield itself into a short-term assignment, or you might find that you're suddenly doing a threat assessment for the, Clackamas Valley School District. I'm not sure if that's a real district or not, but,
Well,
it might be in Portland. I'll have to ask Flannery.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, as we talk about and walk through this, there's just no shortage of work, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is that there's really no shortage of work and or opportunity.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And look, I love social media as much as next. It often helps us get the word out on important things that we're doing here. I mean, and other nonprofits we're involved in, like the IPSB. But at the end of the day, I mean, you don't get caught up in that funnel, like, oh, there's no work here or all the work's here. I mean, you gotta plan your work and work your plan and stay in your OODA loop and keep driving, keep grinding.
Yeah, I agree. Lots going on, man. Lots going on.
All right, should we talk about it?
Okay, yes. Almost like a script.
Wait for
This
it.
falls under who didn't see that coming. Oh, 311, you made it.
Oh, 311.
Incoming.
Putin 1, Wagner Group 0.
Yes.
And to quote the CIA director, I mean, Putin does prefer, he's patient and prefers to serve it up cold. Yeah. I'm not, that was stunning to see the head of the Wagner mercenary group nuked in an assassination last week.
Was it though?
Well, so let me put it this way. The way it was done was interesting. The fact that it was done was not surprising. I honestly was expecting to have fell out a window. In fact, Fred and I were talking about that. We went to lunch and we're like, okay, how back when this first started in Prigozhin and company said, hey, we're tired of not getting ammunition. And I don't know if you've heard any of the tapes where they are translating his calls back where, like, we just need our blanking ammunition. Give us our blanking ammunition. We'll blanking win this war. And he got upset and said, hey, we're going to point this at Russia and show you that we are serious. May have said, oops, the puppy. And then Fred and I were out at lunch saying, how is he going to die? I thought he would be poisoned or just fall out a window in Belarus.
Yeah, I thought it would be a little less overt, but I think it goes back to, like, how we're conditioned to think about the Russians and the Israelis, where you go, yeah, that's what they do. Everybody else would be like, oh my God, there'd be an investigation, all this stuff, and it would be a travesty, or something would be happening, and calls to arms or whatever. But that's the thing with the Israelis and the Russians. It's just like, yeah, we saw that coming. All right, what's for breakfast? Like, it's just crazy.
Well, curiously enough, the Russian version of the FAA, who normally is very slow to comment on anything, they came out within, I think, 15 minutes saying, "Oh, this has happened." And presumably, I have not fact checked this, but presumably, the IED was placed in a case of wine that came aboard the aircraft.
How much? It's all.
That was a terrible vintage
on your new life.
Yeah.
Love, Vladimir.
Yeah. Love, VP. Oh, I'm very important. Open that bottle.
Let's do this.
It's interesting, if you look at how people are talking about it, some are saying, will Prigozhin be recalled as a martyr or a traitor? Obviously Putin branded him have said he's a talented businessman, but also branded him a traitor back in June. But, I would ask you as like someone who's been in the private military contracting world directly, I mean, what are your thoughts about this? I mean, I saw the makeshift memorial to Prigozhin and his lieutenants. Obviously this likely is going to crumble the Wagner empire that stretches from Ukraine all the way into Africa.
Right.
But, and I realize, like, look, the private military companies that operate out of the US operate out of, I would say, like places like the UK and other Western countries. They're not going to jail saying, "Hey, if you'd like to get out of jail, murderer, you can come fight." But I would also say that probably also breeds a very different type of loyalty, if you will. I mean, What are your thoughts as a former Blackwater?
Well, I think we talked about this previously. I'm going to give high level overview, and then we'll talk about that question. Is I think that once he went big and said, "Hey, it's on, and it's a coup, and we're going to do this," he was committed, and he didn't commit. Mm-hmm. Right? Like you knew there was only going to be one outcome after that, right? So it's the thing is that, do you want to go on your terms, or do you want to go on somebody else's, right? I mean, and I think that he stepping away from that, he lost all of his leverage and freaking cut his own throat.
Well, I mean, it's if you think about land, air, sea warfare axioms, I mean, you lose momentum, you lose the war.
Right. And if you take a tactical pause when you're in control, and then you cede that whatever that movement is, I think that was a significant strategic mistake. Well, clearly, it was very, very deadly. Now, having said that, you talked about loyalty. I think a couple of things. The biggest piece of loyalty out of whatever it was that would drive him as a leader is that part where he's freaking like basically telling his employer, "Give me my fucking ammo because I don't want my boys to die," right? People will follow that guy to freaking hell and back, right? They're like, "You want me to do what?" Absolutely, because overtly you've challenged your client, who is a freaking world power government.
Well, you said, put "Hey, the troops, you put mission first, people always." I mean,
right. And you're like, "I'm trying to do my mission, but you not providing me my mission has an impact on my people. And regardless where they come from, they're my people. And freaking, give me my shit so I can freaking do my job."
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can't. That's very, very hard to find, right? Because most people would be like, "Oh, you're not going to give me my shit? Then I'm just going to go home and we'll chill out until you do what you want me to, until I get what I need, and then I'll come back and consider it." That guy's like,
I think it's a very interesting, like, dual edge, if you will, too. You look at this guy, one sense, a private army, if you will, for Putin. That's not me. Other people have said that. Putin's chef doing very dastardly, for lack of a better term, deeds all over the world in the name of Putin as a private military contractor, if you will. Mm-hmm. So when some say, you look at him, you're like, oh, definitely a bad non-state actor.
Yeah.
But then you also have to look at the military leadership of, "Hey, fellas and ladies, I'm willing to go to bat to the highest power to back you because I think that we're getting the short end of the stick."
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting thought process, and I wonder, like, what is the outcome to the issue in Ukraine now without Wagner there to I see that Putin is calling for um, a press for a new offensive. But I wonder, without Wagner there, what happens to that, and does it also inch us a little closer to the use of tactical nukes, which is in the Russian and Soviet playbook?
Right. So I think, going back to the Wagner piece, where you almost have you do have an overt tie to those objectives. I think there's a couple things that go on here. One of the things that as a former PMC or security contractor, that I was concerned about is the fact that, one of the things that the global nation states have been concerned about is that level of military capability and power, right? Where a non-state actor could overthrow a standing government and then suddenly be, they're in charge, right? And I think that was one of the things where they denounced mercenary companies, was because they just wanted to make sure that somebody with the biggest purse strings couldn't overthrow a sovereign country, right? And so that was a little bit concerning. I would say one of the things I would kind of remove from your statement would be bad, right? Because bad or good, it's relative to whatever side of the coin you stand on, right? I mean, I'm not sure everybody in Russia is like, Wagner Group's bad, I mean, they might be after they try to overthrow the government, but you understand what I'm saying, right? I mean, with the intent that the private military company is supposed to be neutral, and it focuses on the objectives of its employer. Usually they're aligned with their government, or on behalf of their government, but and their government objectives, which could include commercial, but that is quite subjective at times.
Yeah, I mean, I label his actions as contrary to what Randolph believes in, so that's just my own opinion.
Bad for you.
But I totally agree with. I mean, you got to look at it in multiple ways. One, like, very effective fighting force. I wouldn't compare them to like executive outcomes or any of the other, even maybe the British East Indies Company, if you will, a long time ago. But let's not forget, Wagner's also, they're not just involved in Ukraine or Russia or troops on the ground. They're very much a logistic machine, and logistics and cyber leviathan as well, as a way for Russia. So it will be interesting to see, how does it survive? Does a sous chef take over? And are there unintended consequences?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it would be something as simple as the board, puts a new president in place, and we move on.org, right? And that guy, you freaking, he's got 3 fingers missing because
he's very, very cautious.
They're on Putin's desk, right? I mean, like here's the deal. I'll do this for you. I serve and have served, right? Or will serve. So it's just an interesting, it is an interesting dynamic. It did concern me again, though, just that here's a non-state actor that has the capability, at least in a basic fighting force, to essentially threaten, one of the 5 global powers, right? And with a coup, and become very close. Like, the only reason that he didn't was because he stopped, right?
Yeah.
And then
I mean, we probably, sometime in the next 15 years, we'll probably get a more clear understanding of what happened there. But I would be curious, like, there were some discussions that were supposed to be along the way of that drive to Moscow. And I wonder at some point if there was a little bit of like sleight of hand, like, hey, I'm here for you. Let's stop and see. No problem. I worked it all out. Go away. And then, like, whoops, I've been screwed over. Or, if somebody blinked, somebody else in his gang that said, hey, yeah, I'm now afraid that it's not going to work out that way. But also very, it's interesting. I also agree with the non-state actor piece, and I think that's something that's been around for a very long time. Again, we could go all the way back to the East Indies Company, but I think it's something that, of course, Blackwater is not the Wagner Group, but I mean, the rise and the influence of non-state actors, is interesting, and will continue to affect the geostrategic and geopolitical space. I mean, especially now, like, look, I the Wagner Group also showed us, like you said, we could wield a lot of power and we could put a lot of combat power in the name of somebody to make this happen.
Right. I think from a protector point of view, it becomes interesting because, where do your allegiances lie in this political piece? Whether it's a hostile takeover of a corporation, or whether it's a potential coup of a government, like what does that look like? I think that we'd seen some interesting challenges in, I think the most recent one that I'm aware of would be Haiti, right? Where there were some folks that were aligned with the deposed president and they jumped on a plane with him, and other folks were aligned with the position and they stayed in place to support the position, right? And I think while somewhat unsavory in that act, right? Because from my perspective, it's the position. I think it was handled well because, look, if your alignment took you with that president, then and you're more loyal to the person than the office, then you kind of separated yourself and put yourself in a position to protect them as they continued. And then again, this is all overt. Like, we don't know what happened behind the scenes, but it was split very well, I thought. The one thing that I would echo with Chuck Randolph, though, is never get on the van.
Yeah, well,
as we see with this Prigozhin thing,
Well, I already saw people saying this was an EP fail, assuming that they had protection with him.
Right.
Assuming, I guess when I look at this from a protector's point of view is like, hey, look, if you have a private plane, or you've chartered a private plane, make sure that you've had somebody look at it, or make sure that it's had the once over, gone over it. It's good to go. I mean, I think the idea of it's private, therefore it should be, it should be good to go. Don't. And if you're in a corporation, or your corporation has air assets, you better have, and if they're not in your sphere of influence, you better have coffee with them at least once every couple months. Ask some questions and offer up some training out or the ability to kind of come in and sweep the plane.
Right. Yep. Based on
one last thing I'd say
risks
on the PMC front, Chris, if people are interested in, the Wagner Group's not the first PMC out there. They won't be the last. I mean, you think about executive outcomes. They were and are active in Africa. They've got some interesting history to learn from. This Sandline International, the Sandline Affair in Papua New Guinea, very interesting. I can't think of the book that was written, but there's a very interesting book written back in the 90s about PMCs that originated from the UK. And then, of course, there's Sterling Corporate Services, all kinds, just some interesting things if you're a student of history or these things kind of interest you to kind of go look at.
Well, I mean, look, it's always going to be around because there are just things you cannot send your standing military to go do, right? Or if your standing military is not capable to do, right? There's always just going to be that piece. I would say that there is a difference between being a logistics company, a training company, and conducting defensive or security operations, and then going to conduct offensive operations on behalf of a government or another client, a corporate client, right? Yeah. Those things happen, right? And they will continue to happen.
Absolutely. Let's bring it back to a little more tactical threat management lens, if you will. I pulled an article from Yahoo. I originally had seen it from the EP Monthly that Torchstone put out. And I went and did a little extra reading because this idea of the influencer, I don't mean the security influencer, I mean like the people playing games and the TikTokers of the world, if that's the right way to say it.
Right.
And there was recently TikTok star Anna Lapwood, who she's an organist. She plays all over. She was stalked by this gentleman from the US who ultimately bought a one-way ticket to stalk her in the UK. So this guy, Elliot Bennett, followed her across the country when she was here in the US in a tour playing the organ. He attended all of her meet and greets and even got down on a knee and asked her to marry him. She then said, "Hey, I have a boyfriend. Thank you very much, but I'm good to go." He got angry, he chased him across the parking lot apparently. She went back to obviously rattled. She goes back to the UK. She was performing at Royal Albert Hall. The guy had bought a ticket. Bennett was there again. He's eventually was arrested and sentenced to 6 months, and he's got an indefinite restraining order. But, you know, she said it was a terrifying incident and feared for her safety. Now, the interesting piece of this, like, everyone's like, did her protector miss it? Did they know? Did she have protection?
Right. Did she have one?
You know,
exactly. Right.
You know, I think of the
Calm
same thing
down.
of like people involved in Twitch or other online, you know, EA Sports or other online gaming communities. I mean, it's like a movie star. Hey, look, or a rock star or a country music star or a heavy metal star. See what I did there?
Yeah.
And
Appreciate you.
look, I need people to buy my stuff. I need people to buy my art so that I can continue doing it. But maybe I'm at a point where I have a larger apparatus around me. I have people that are helping me with my logistics management, all that. So they have that. What about these younger folks in these industries where like, hey, I am an influencer, but I'm not at that level, but I need to get followers. I need people to hit like, I need people to follow me. So I need accessibility to people. But by doing that, I'm opening myself up to some risk of some interesting people.
Yeah. Well, because interesting people attract other interesting people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or eccentric or whatever. And I think, here's the funny thing is that usually we would go, hey, we see this in the celebrity space, and we can kind of, see it coming, and you've got managers, you've got all these other people that can put safety layers in place to provide security. And usually, as we know, it's usually event driven, not individual driven. In other words, they don't have enough money to freaking employ somebody full time, right? So if they're going to a venue, that'll be an event security person that handles that.
They'll take care of me, right?
Yeah, it'll be fine, right? And so I think it's almost it seems like an opportunity, because it is a celebrity space where you're saying, hey, look, in order for me to be famous, I have to have access. And people have to have access to me, or at least have the perception of access to me. But as I do this, I do need to be concerned about my security. Now, what does that entail usually? Hey, bro, you're in the gym, you look big. Can you just stand next to me while we're doing this? And then suddenly that becomes a thing, and you're an employee and you're part of the crew, and we've all seen how that shakes out. I do think there is likely some opportunity though for some professional consulting on, hey, here's some personal safety steps, here's some public performance safety steps, here's some arrivals, departures, how to mask your personal life and keep your personal life separate from your Instagram life, or TikTok life, all those things. But people want that fame and those likes a lot more than they want than they're concerned with their safety until something happens, right?
So interesting. Was given an article at ATAP from a friend of mine out in New York. He said, we were talking about this idea of like the online gamer, the influencer, TikTok, Twitch, EA Sports, others. And he sent this New York Times article to me and said, you should read this. It's pretty interesting. We'll put it in the show notes. It's behind a paywall, so maybe you can find somebody that's got an NYT login, or just get one yourself. But it says in the article, they're talking about Twitch more than Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok is an intimate platform designed to make it stars seem like actual friends, hanging out with them virtually. Those, quote, cozy relationships are a core part of the site's business model, but they sometimes turn unhealthy. And the person says, this Twitch streamer says, in live streams, they see into your home, your bedroom. It feels very personal with them. I think that contributes to a lot of stalking. They feel like they know you. Again, I think about this like this. I'm not saying this is a new, but I think it's a burgeoning area of protection, a burgeoning area of threat assessment, because of some of the things you talked. I don't have the money. I don't have the money to hire Chris Story yet. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be doing these things. What can we do to arm these folks with, like, we go all the way back to the beginning of conversation, situational awareness.
Right.
Like,
identify the risk, right?
And many of these are, I'm not saying anything about younger people, but they're also younger people too. I mean, where are you in your career? Like 2 years ago, I was in college, and now I'm playing video games and making,
well, the other thing is there's
$25,000 a month.
Yeah, there's these like husband and wife groups and these families and kids, and they're doing all these things. And like we talked about that open source piece. If I follow you and I follow you enough, and I
Yeah.
go to your Instagram page or TikTok page, I can figure out where you live. I know the layout of your house. I know who's there all the time, who's not. The wife is hot, or the husband's hot, or the kid, whatever freaky shit you got going on that you're exposing to and letting people in your life. You have to have these considerations. And again, people are like, well, everybody love us. I've got 50,000 likes or 100,000 or a million
Yep.
or whatever the case is, except for the part that those people who love you too much, right? So, I want to get into Drew Barrymore that happened this week.
Before I forget, I'll go and see if I can remember where this was, but I listened to another podcast over the last couple of days, and the discussion was around kidfluencers.
Yeah.
Which I pulled up because knowing, we were going to talk about this today, and it's something that I'm thinking about because I think there's a security risk gap that can be filled by protectors here.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
Even the kidfluencers, speaking about all the freak shows out there. And there's a lot of talk about human trafficking and things, especially in the veterans world, people trying to get around that and help battle that. I mean, I don't have an answer yet. We don't have an answer yet, but I think collectively we're going to find one, and we need to start talking about it. And I think that's the step one, is to expose the risk so we can start talking about mitigating.
Yeah, I agree. I think this kind of leads into that. My segue would be a little bit more clumsy because I said I want to talk about Drew Barrymore, but she was on stage in Manhattan, earlier in the week, and a stalker that was known to her, was basically stood up and said, "Hey, I think you know me. And asked his question or whatever, right?" And you could see the recognition on her face, right? Like oh shit, like it wasn't like, oh shit, I need to whatever, but it was interesting that the host was like, okay, time to go, and the dude started moving toward the stage, and luckily they had some layer that was able to escort the guy off. So the story continues with the same guy being found in her neighborhood, riding his bicycle from house to house, telling the other residents that he's looking for her and her house because he wants to talk to her. Right, this couple of days later. So interestingly, people call the cops, and then he gets rolled up, and it's like
thankfully,
and it's a thing. And he gets he has to wear like a tracker for 60 days and whatever. But again, I think on some level, in some way, shape, or form, the system worked, partially because his leakage was too much for him. Like he was like, "Hey, it's me," right? Instead of following her on arrival, departure, or whatever the case is. And he was overt and maybe not the brightest goat in the herd about that. What's also interesting, though, he was charged with the fourth degree misdemeanor, whatever that means. A little bit of bail, wear a tracker for this many days, and then you're good to go, right? So it's interesting, like how seriously was it? Is it being taken? Is it a significant risk? All of those things. What does it look like? Clearly, from a law enforcement perspective, again, something has to happen before you're charged, and those things have happened. It's a little bit lower level, but from a security perspective, significant emotional event. We've talked about this before. Being secure versus feeling secure, and then how do you make that person feel secure as they are secure? With one stalker who's highlighted himself, and I'm sure Drew Barrymore. You talked about kidfluencers. She's been a star since she was a child, so I'm sure she just has people rolling out of the freaking dumpster fire as the girl next door.
At ATAP, listened to somebody from LAPD Threat Management Unit. They were talking about this is almost like a Monday for them.
Right.
And I think that this is my assessment, not what they said, but like the interesting thing is how many of them in the unit are there, and how many of these things are happening every day. And hey, Chris, here you go. Here's your misdemeanor, and you got to wear a tracker 60 days. 60 days, tracker comes off, you go right back to it.
Right, you're in a timeout, and then now you're back in the game. Yeah.
Now there will be some people will be dissuaded by law enforcement. I mean, many years ago, when I first got in the industry, and an older person who was a fixer told me, look, everybody's afraid of something. You just got to figure out what it is.
Right.
Sometimes it's the law. Sometimes it's something more lethal. Of course, we're not condoning that, but you gotta consider that. And a lot of people don't care. Like, great, I got five misdemeanors. I'm going to keep going back to try to find Chris.
Yeah.
Because that guy owes me 45 pesos, and I'm now fixated on that.
Right. It's either, what is it, carnies, because they've got small hands, or the Dutch.
Or the Dutch. Nice. I see what you did there. Oh my God.
Everybody's afraid of something.
Yep.
What's the other? You said two things. What's the other thing? Oh, the Dutch.
the Dutch. Yeah. I also think it goes back again. Like, somebody's like, well, what didn't Drew Barrymore's protection detail? She probably doesn't have one.
Yeah, probably doesn't have one, right? I mean, and that's the funny thing is, I'm glad you said it, because I was just thinking about this, which was, every protector is like, that was a failure. Okay, got it there.
It was a failure, but of what?
What exactly, right? Like the assumption that everybody and their brother has an EP detail is a fallacy, And to include people who are worth $100 million.
Millions. Yeah, millions. Yeah, I don't know at what point you say. I don't think it's just a combination of money. There's a lot of things.
Right.
There's a lot of things, a lot of accountants, a lot of financial risk, and all things that go into, hey, I want to start a detail.
Right. And we talked about how it takes a significant amount of things to be put in place for that protector to be put next to somebody else. Right. Now, sometimes it's just to check the box, because this is how we've always done it. But in order to get to how we've always done it, there's always had to be some level of thought process that gets there. And I think, when we were growing up, it was in writing. If you have a net worth of over $1 million, you should consider getting a security professional, to support you. Right. And this is when, minimum wage was freaking, $5.35 an hour. Right. So again, minimum wage, $5.35 an hour is not a whole lot of money, obviously, but neither is $1 million, right? And so, so what does that look like? And it's, as we know, it's a significant outlay to support, even one person during the day, full time, So you got to kind of get over that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's also assuming that she would want that. But they did. I will say, having looked at the video, they did a good job. They walked out, put myself in front of the young man, and then the host just calmly, they get up and walk off stage, which is what you should do. I've been there. You've been there. And the other thing is like, hey, how did the guy get in? He bought a ticket.
Yeah, I know. It's like a shareholders event. Like, hey, these people on our bolo, what do you need to get in? We have all this access.
Yeah,
hey, Chief,
I went on Ticket Hub.
Yep. And
I went on StubHub and bought a ticket. I went here. I will say, I think there's a piece for technology in here, of which, if we do have known threat actors and we have pictures and things, I don't know that we're there yet, but I do believe we'll come to a point. And I know everyone's like, Minority Report, but where people are coming in, scan the crowd. Oh, there's Chuck. He's on a known list. Let's get him in for secondary interview before we let him into the venue.
Right. Or he can be here, but he just is in this other room where there's layers and other things, and you're just doing your thing. Yeah. So anyways, I think that's just a good case study across the board, multiple levels, and it was overt, and it kind of hit the news and important for people to look at, And
I've got I'll link an article to that has the actual video in the show notes, so you can kind of go see the reaction. Just please avoid like, he should have done this or that.
Right. I think the other thing is
they had a plan, maybe,
is that they had a professional approach, right, wrong, or indifferent. Whether the guy was a professional or not, because he kind of looked like a stagehand to me. It was either stage or law enforcement or whatever. I couldn't really tell by the video. But the important piece is that, like, one of the things that we see in the entertainment industry is that somebody gets on stage and is dancing next to the person, the singer or the bassist or whatever. No threat. They've just breached your barrier.
They get plowed.
Right? And they get plowed. Right? And we call that success. And that, it's one thing if they're, if they just try to tackle the person, right? Then they're a threat, right? But if they're
Yep.
just dancing up there and they slip past, Steve, who was looking the other way or dealing with something else, and they got up there, they don't need to be blasted right back off the freaking 12-foot stage into the crowd.
Well, and if you're an EP, many folks in EP or close protection, they do event security as well. You look at someone like Anton, they do it very well, very professionally. First thing you need to do when you go to a venue is ask, like, what's our plan for this? Or what's our plan even if you're like, hey, I'm in this far right vomitorium, what do I do if I'm approached? If they don't tell you.
Right.
Ask the leading question. It's an open book test that we're all in. Ask the leading question. What should I do if? And if you're planning your first event, I think I go back to, Chris, what we said earlier, like being in the infantry. One of the first things you learn to do as an infantryman or infantry person is movement to contact. Works here too. What do we do if we're contacted? Mm-hmm. What do we do if this happens? How do we manage this? And you think about like the sliding scale of use of force. Hey, does everybody get slammed? No, maybe they get moved somewhere else. Let's talk about it. Ask the question. Right. Talk to the event folks.
More importantly, if I throw somebody off stage and they break something and they sue, who gets named in that lawsuit? Is that me or is it everybody else? Because that's going to be that might be a strong indication as to how you respond.
There's a whole industry right now where defense attorneys or plaintiffs' attorneys are hiring protectors who are subject matter experts to come in and say, now let's go all the way back to Venmo, TikTok, LinkedIn, everything. Now I'm going to go look at everything you did and I'm going to pick it apart. And it's not going to be like, bro should have done this. It's going to be very methodic, very professional, and just things to think about. I mean, welcome to your professional world as a close protection practitioner.
Exactly.
What else you got?
There's a lot, dude, but I think we freaking hit the high points, don't you?
And I do want to real quick a shout out to the Silicon Valley Security Group. I think you're a member of that. I'm a member of it.
I'm an honorary member.
I went out there last week and spent time with Allison, Ricardo, and company as they open their LA chapter. And one of the reasons I love this crowd because everyone wants to be there. They're all not close protection folks. They're security folks. So you get the whole gamut of people from a chief security officer to, hey, I'm the threat investigator or the regional security person for this company. It's a nonprofit like the IPSB. They're all fans of the International Protective Security Board, which, it humbles me, humbles you, because, we're out there trying to make sure we raise the bar for everyone. And I'm really excited to see that community come together. I mean, it was a great event. Again, shout out to Allison, Ricardo for all the hard work they do to try to build that community. I mean, you and I both know building a nonprofit is a labor of love, of which there is no paycheck.
Indeed.
The paycheck is in the heart, Chris.
Yes. I get my thanks by you being thankful. So I think the other thing is that that group is I think it can be very, very powerful because of who it represents in the Silicon Valley, right? I mean, I think and it represents a lot of the customers, which I think is very important. We talked about this before, is that like most of the folks in that group represent customers or clients, and they're very well positioned. And I think they're I think they're also open to,
have you seen their events where they're like, hey, come pitch to the group? So if you have tech or innovation, you can go, and they have pitch days, which I think is cool. Yeah. Again, it's not a close protection group per se. If you get on, you have to be vouched for. They have a Slack channel. There's an EP Slack channel. There's an events. I mean, all the typical stuff like buy my service and this and that. But there's also a lot of activity and mindfulness activities. People who like, I understand you and your plight. Let's go grab a beer, or let's go for a walk, so I think it's good. Shout out to those guys, and it was such a great event. We also raised money for Hawaii. Everyone wore a Hawaiian shirt and donated money to help those folks who are afflicted over there.
You remind me. I wanted to say something about when you talked about Hawaii. So finish that because I want to talk about that real quick.
But no, it's great. I look forward to more of their events. And if you're in LA or you're in Silicon Valley or you're interested in that, I mean, find them on LinkedIn and get involved.
Good times. Yeah. So let me talk about the Hawaii thing. And I just wanted to, we were talking, it's kind of popped in my mind. We were talking about how risk, right? And here it is you have a natural disaster, right? That precipitates another natural disaster, right?
Yep.
Or it could be man-made. When you've got no cell phone, no power, everybody's in a certain environment, and then you've got a threat that's a moving natural disaster threat that is has an impact across the board.
Talk about non-state actor.
Right, exactly right. That you can't fight, and that you've got to be, how do you find your principals or your clients? How do you get them in, get them out, and then what does that look like early? Whether you're looking at triggers, right? Because it started off as a storm, and the storm's like, okay, we lost power for a little bit, and all of a sudden there was a fire, and then suddenly it becomes a different risk event. But you're hearing about it being reported, and you can't communicate with anybody on the ground. So I think it's just I know what brought this up was the test, right? When you say, hey, look at my program, or look at my social media, or look at my whatever, to poke holes in it. It's always great when I tell you about it, right? But when you give me feedback on it, go, hey, look, here's some gaps that I see. And we only usually see gaps when we're tested. So the whole idea behind red teaming is get your test in early so you can fix all the things that you will be tested on in real life. And I thought that the Hawaii thing was just a great example of a perfect storm, where we always think that we're always going to have power, or we'll always have at least power, landline, or cell phone service. And we had none of that, in the Hawaii piece. So just something for folks to consider as they look at their risk plans.
Yet another podcast I listened to over all the travels I've been doing lately. And you and I talked about this the other day when we caught up on the phone. Was this, they were talking to a neuroscientist, and he essentially was talking about future you. And I think it's interesting, just maybe think about what you said, like in the now. So I'm going to dumb it down because I'm dumb and I needed it dumbed down for me. Essentially, if you are listening and you think about your future self, the way you physiologically react when they wire people up, is I don't think of my future self as I think of myself now. I think of that future self as yet somebody else, like another different person that's not you. So that went on. It was about a whole bunch of things, but it got me thinking about how this idea of risk and risk acceptance. It's fine, this kick the can, because we're maybe wired to not consider that future issue, because right now, that probably goes back to us being hunter-gatherers, like, hey, I've got some meat and food, we're good now, we'll worry about tomorrow. But of course, in the podcast, we're saying one way to kind of test that is to write yourself a letter as your future self. I have not done that. I'm not sure I could do that, but I think something like Hawaii, Chris, like kind of highlights that. Like look, here we are. You must consider the future now. You live in a place, and all of a sudden you're back to 1926.
Right.
How are you going to do? What are you going to do? And again, it's the prepper mind. It's prepping versus the prepper mindset.
Yes.
So I don't know. That's a good call on that one. One more thing I want to make sure we bring up is the Close Protection Conference, my friend. You guys.
What?
I know. December happening.
The Close Protection Conference.
They just released.
Dude, that's less than 3 months away.
Yeah. Well, I know you and Flannery and all the folks putting the agenda together have been working hard. And of course, as usual, the keynote is, waiting to be announced as they work behind the scenes with riders and everything else. But it looks like it's going to be great. I mean, talking about assassins, there's a conversation with a young man that was detained while getting on the private plane to come back from a detail in Africa. Major event planning. You got the corporate folks who are going to present on corporate issues, state of protection, threat management, so securing royalty. Jackie's going to talk about that. I mean, and more. But I'm excited. You know, you kind of get in these lulls in travel, and then you're like, okay, here we go. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about that lull in travel, right? Like, and you talk about recharging. I know for me, one of the big things about the conference is that it reinvigorates my focus, belief, love of the industry, right? I mean, you take that break and you focus on what you focus on that professional development for yourself and the industry, and you focus on the industry, not your client, not work, not the stuff, but you focus on the industry. And I think that's what really helps me get recharged, for that next year.
It's great. You know, I was way at the beginning of this, I was talking about ATAP and how it's a conference I like to attend. And I had a couple of folks at ATAP when we had the EP mixer saying, look, I love to go to the Close Protection Conference just to attend. And multiple people came up saying, hey, am I still able to get on and speak? Am I still able? And I'm like, well, you got to talk to Flannery and Story about that. But I mean, just the outpouring of people that say, look, I want to raise the bar for the community, you know, everything aside, I mean, you know, I think you're right. You know, Simon Sinek talks about understanding and finding and maintaining that why. For me, the conference does that. It's also, personally, it's a kickoff for the holiday season for me. Because I know, like, okay, most of these folks probably have one more detail, and then they're all going to hopefully be home celebrating holidays with friends and family, myself included. So, yeah, I'm excited. Obviously, more to follow. I cross-posted the IPSB's message out on the Close Protection or on our CiCP LinkedIn page of my own. And they're also, I see that Fonda has put out the hotels. All the things are coming up. So let's go. I mean, and you know, tickets now that all this is out will go rapidly. So I hope that people get theirs and we see them. And if you're a fan of the show, please find Chris or I at the conference and give us some feedback. Yeah.
If it's negative, give it to me. If it's positive, Chuck. Good times.
Yeah, good times. Awesome. Well, I think with that, there's always 4 or 5 things left on the floor, but I think we've shot the proverbial bolt, if you will. So this has been Conversations in Close Protection. My name is Chuck Randolph. Across the digital divide, the Schadenfreude of security himself, Mr. Chris Story.
Doctor, also Dr. Podcast himself, Mr. Chuck Randolph, who has stated he's listened to multiple podcasts. Dude, you're Papa Podcast, aren't you? Because you're
I travel.
Ours, you're on freaking yours.
Yep.
You're on, and then you're listening to all the other podcasts. Good for you, Chuck. Awesome. Good times.
I can't sleep on a plane, brother. So I'm like, let's go. And I have one of those remarkable tablets where you can handwrite or you can type, and you can't search the web on it. So put on a podcast and just start taking notes. So anyways, lifelong learner. Cry. Awesome. Well, with that, wash your hands, watch your 6, and keep your bloody head down.
Yes. Keep your head down. Good times.
You've been listening to an episode of Conversations in Close Protection. Email us at protectiontalk@outlook.com and find us on your preferred podcast platform. Please take a moment and consider rating us to help others find Conversations in Close Protection too. Look for us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and other social media spots. Conversations in Close Protection is brought to you by your hosts Chuck Randolph and Chris Story. Our engineering editor is the mighty Aaron Peck. Please remember that all opinions expressed do not represent those of any organizations or companies the hosts are affiliated with. This is Rachel saying watch your 6 and keep your heads down.